So the first thing we actually do is that we just like smile so that they can have like a good shot just in case.
All right.
All right. Jess, here we are. Jess and I made this pinky swear over the phone that we were going to be the quote, Brene Brown brave on this podcast today. We had this whole thing planned. And then we had this conversation, which I think we should talk about, where we flipped our conversation on its ass and decided we were going to have a totally different conversation than the one. Do you want to explain it or should I explain it?
Yeah, well, I can share a little bit about about what happened. We were going to talk a lot about a number of things, but one of the things we were going to talk about was, and we can dig into this. We were going to talk about intuitive eating and how, just our thoughts about that. And I had a freak out, and I was like, I'm really scared to talk about this because I'm scared of being cyberbullied.
Right.
And I reached out to you. I was like, okay. As I'm writing to you, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm emailing this brain dump like on a full moon when I have my period and am just like not in my right mind.
Yeah. Little do you know, brain dump is like legitimately my love language. So anytime, girl, anytime.
Yeah. But so you called me on it. You were like, hello, we need to talk about this.
Well, I think it's like the only thing we need to be talking about. So side note, I love Jess. My inner fat girl, anytime I even hear the word nutritionist, all of my diet drama and trauma comes up. And so 2 years ago, when I wrote Breaking Up with Sugar, you interviewed me and I was like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. And I just fell madly in love with you, because you were just so balanced and smart. So, right. So you write me that email. You're like, well, I'm sort of nervous to talk with you about intuitive eating because I don't want anyone to think I'm anti-intuitive eating. And I say, Jess, who's anti-intuitive eating? Like who's, and I would say, maybe I'll get cyberbullied. I'm not even that popular. So I might welcome some cyberbullying. That might be exciting for me. But I would say who's anti-food addiction? But I think we should talk about both of those topics today, by the way. But, it's right around the time we're filming this that there's this really big thing going on in, I don't know, like the eating disorder, nutrition, food and weight community around Will Cole's book, Intuitive Fasting. I don't know about you. I've been deep in it. I've been deep in this conversation. And I actually really understood what you said because I had been deep in this conversation, seeing people's reaction to unread the book, haven't read the book, but the reaction to the book title, I imagine. And I guess for me, when you said that, it was so, first it hurt my heart, but it was really, I come to this so authentically, right? I come as like a survivor, right? I come as an eating disorder survivor, an obesity survivor, a bad treatment survivor. And I was like, if Jess Cordin is about to silence herself, that's the conversation. Like, that's the conversation that I want to be having because, we're here to heal and we're here to help. So like, can you tell me about your process? Can you just give me like the background on it? Like what happened?
Yes, it's funny because I'm a double Sagittarius. Like I am just like breathing fire all
For those at
day
home
long.
who don't know what that means, can you just explain what that means to those who don't know what
So
a double
my
Sagittarius is?
sun sign, my traditional like zodiac sign, Sagittarius, the archer, and we are very very fiery individuals. But then there's your rising sign, which is sort of how you present to the world. And I also happen to have Sagittarius as my rising sign. So a lot of people have like, one rising sign is like one thing and they have something else. I'm just,
You're just like full blown fire is what we're saying.
Oh my gosh. And my husband's a double Gemini. So it's like we're direct opposites, except we both have a moon in Cancer, which means we feel a lot of things. And we have this like this soft inner core.
So it's lots of feelings in the house.
Always so much boiling under the surface for me.
Welcome to my life. Okay.
But so what you were describing though, like that situation, I get asked this a lot. I don't happen to practice intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
I just don't feel like for me it's a very good choice for mental health reasons,
Mhm.
just because of my own health history. I was someone who had an eating disorder very, very young, like 11, 12 years old, that
Mhm.
I think if it was today, it would be probably classified as orthorexia, but
Mhm.
that term wasn't part of the DSM back then. But I
Right.
was lucky to get really good treatment.
What
But
what would you say orthorexia is today? Like how would you define it as a nutrition?
so, yeah, just casual definition that I will use when people ask me about it is an
I love a
unhealthy
casual
obsession.
definition. I love a casual definition. Yeah, let's get to it.
It's like, real everyday language. I will say that it's an unhealthy obsession with eating healthfully, and it can just get out of control.
Yeah. There's like, I would say a lot of like orthorexia NOS. That's what we'd call depression. But like there's a lot of like low grade orthorexia that travels around like healthy, right?
Oh,
Wouldn't you
yeah.
say that?
And it's like I can tell, because of my experience, like even though it was like almost 25 years ago, like my antenna goes up, when I'm working with a patient and I sense they could get that frequency.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to talk about this. So I
It's a
think some
hard line, isn't it, with people sometimes where it's like, is this health or is this eating disorder? It's
and
tough.
knowing when to talk to them about that and knowing how to like just tiptoe towards that, because I see people who are in their 40s and 50s who've been living with this for decades and
Oh,
never
absolutely.
explored it. And it's like, okay, when's the right moment to say something? And
Well,
sometimes,
and I say, I mean, we protect our substance when we're in the thing. So really talking to somebody about maybe you're a little too particular about food is not an easy conversation to have with someone who doesn't want to stop doing that,
well,
right?
I don't know if this happens to you, but I'm that person when a patient comes see me, like so often they'll drop something that they think is this huge bomb, and they're like, "Oh my God, I've never told anybody that before." That probably happens to you all the time in your work.
Yeah, like all the time.
Yes.
But they'll say something like, I'm so ashamed to tell you this, I ate a pint of ice cream last night. And I'll just think like, and I'll say this sometimes, I'll be like, wait, is that the small one or the big one? And they're like, the one with 4 servings. I was like, oh, like, okay, what else? What else you want to talk about? I love that because it's like and I really believe it. I mean, I'm a pretty destructive night eater back in the day. So nothing really impresses me much. So they say to you, so back in the day, you had a little orthorexia. And so an intermittent fasting doesn't work for you.
I just, anytime, like, experience has taught me that if I try to put restrictions in
Mhm.
terms of like timing or putting too many rules in place, that it doesn't work well for me.
Yeah,
Even though I've thankfully never had the experience of a full blown relapse, what I have had is like I can hear the overthinking and,
absolutely.
the
The
channels.
noise, the noise. Yeah.
And I will say that for me, things like, time restricted eating just don't feel okay for me. But
Mhm.
that said, I some of my patients have done so well with it, and I'm very intrigued by the science of it. And even though
Yeah.
I don't practice it myself, and I don't actively recommend it unless someone brings it up, usually at
Mhm.
this point, because we're still learning about it, and
Absolutely.
we're still learning who's a good candidate, who's the best candidate, what it's really good for, what the appropriate and safe protocols are. Like we're still learning. We don't have a lot of long term data, but I want to be able to have an informed conversation with my patients. I don't want someone to ask me about intuitive eating or excuse me, intermittent fasting, and for me to like, it would not be responsible of me to shut down the conversation and make them feel judged for asking. Like
Yeah.
I need to be able to have a dialogue,
Yeah, I'd fire you in a hot second if you shut me down like that.
right?
And you're
Like,
really great,
well,
but I
good,
fired a lot of nutritionists in my day.
good. Like, I mean, you have to have that trust and that chemistry. It is so important.
Isn't it? So then then what happened? Like what happened so you're like on it. So this book came out. Can I tell you something so funny? I am anti-diet, and anti all that. I loosely intermittently fast, right? I do about 12 to 14 hours. I just find that when I eat a nice early dinner and I don't start again until, 9 the next morning, my body just feels great. Interestingly, I listened to Will Cole on Skinny Confidential, and he does it imperfectly. Like this is my beef with the world right now, but like He's like, yeah, this is how I do it, except for when I don't. And that's how I do it. I'm like, I don't know. I do it unless we have dinner at 9, and then I have dinner at 9. It's
Yeah.
like,
It's like,
I
what's
want
wrong
to,
with
I
that?
want to try to dig into what you think is happening. And I really want to dig into, as helpers, that the fiery Sagittarius almost had her fire put out is frightening to me, Jess.
Well, here's what I'll say. Like, first off, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Cole. I really respect his work. I feel like of all the people in the space talking about this particular topic, I think he takes a very thoughtful approach and very well
Absolutely.
researched, and he spends so much time helping people, like through his writing. He devotes so much of his work explaining how to tune into your body.
Yeah. He's
How to
also like
listen.
doing it, right? Day in, day out. So wait, go to Insta, you're like on Instagram and you're like reading a post.
So that was so frustrating for me because I was like, I'm sure like the therapy world too. You get to know your colleagues,
Yeah.
like in person or virtually. It's like you have these relationships with people, and you think you know what they're like and who they are, and it was um it was really disheartening to me to see people just tearing each other apart. Like in the
Mm.
dietitian community, there's been this rift for a while, like the anti-diet dietitians
Yeah.
who get very incensed around a lot of anything that's tiptoeing towards diet culture, any kinds of rules or restrictions. And I wanted to be compassionate towards that because I know that if you or a loved one has ever struggled with an eating disorder, it can be fatal. It's serious
Absolutely.
shit.
Hmm.
And but what was troubling to me was that a lot of what I saw was people who hadn't read the book, like making these huge declarations. And I saw Dr. Call like posting about how he was getting death threats, and I'm like, whoa,
Ah,
whoa, whoa, like what is happening here?
yeah.
And he
Yeah.
had just been on my podcast that same week, so
Oh, wow.
I was like,
Fancy pants. Wow.
crap. I'm like, what's gonna like? Are they gonna come for
But
me?
you saw a friend of yours effectively get canceled, right?
It was it was just surreal. I was like, because it's just like you see the work that people do, and you see that they do it with such heart and coming from a good place, and to see people just tear it apart. It was like a
Like, what were they saying to her? Do you remember any like thing that you were like, well, what was the thing that when you read it that you were like, I don't know if I can go talk to Molly because she's in the middle path of of intuitive eating.
gosh, I don't remember which post it was.
Hmm.
I think it was just the cumulative effect of all the memes, all the posts with
Yeah.
people just using very inflammatory language. I'm
For
trying to like
real.
not not use all my best New Jersey French on you.
I love it. Bring
Um,
it on.
but
Dirtier the better, girl.
I think that's what it was. And I think it was just also just this intent. It was just building over the course of the weekend, and it was seeing just more and more, and people who I thought I came to, I had this. And I'm not saying just because someone does something on Instagram does not mean that's who they are,
No.
but in that moment, that was something they wanted to share in the way that they wanted to share it. And I kind of just was like, wow, like, is like, if it kind of was like that moment of like, I often will try to think of my like dietitian community, like we're all in it together. And it was just really upsetting to see that there was a really big divide.
And the divide is people saying what? Like, what is the red and blue of it?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it was like just the vibe that I got that day was like intuitive eating is the only way, or,
Yeah.
it's if you even attempt to talk about intermittent fasting. That's diet culture. And I was like, and I'm here, like, I'm a big nerd. I want to research everything and understand it. I'm like, well, hey, what about what's in the literature? Like, and
Yeah.
I have written articles about why I think intermittent fasting was a bad idea back in like 2017 or 2018. But as I've educated myself more, and even though I don't practice it, I've started to kind of be like, okay, well, maybe it works for some people, and maybe this is really interesting. Like,
Yeah. I
I've
think
changed
that
my
the frightening part to me, and I joke in the beginning of our talk today, right? That nobody knows me. I could get cyberbullied, which I'm happy to get cyberbullied. But I think as you said that, listen, I run a really different ship too, right? Like I am anti-diet, and I also believe wholeheartedly in food addiction, right? And I've seen it. I also want to say, I believe wholeheartedly in intuitive eating. I mean, I've sat in a chair being a professional. I've sat in a lot of eating disorder circles with women and men who are all suffering and the only thing I think I've learned in all of this is that there's literally no one solution.
Yes.
And I'm finding it fascinating that, like, clinically, I'll say the trauma response that people are having when somebody says something that isn't their plan. That's, as I was reading through some of the comments, it's like, how dare you say intermittent fasting? That almost killed me. How dare you say keto? That almost killed me. And then someone will say, how dare you not say keto? That saved my life.
Yeah.
And I happen to be someone who intuitive eating nearly killed me. I've had people walk into my office doing, just what do they call it? The food testing
Oh, the one where they do
challenge, right? So I've had people come into my office having food challenges of cake with blood sugar levels, having to like down water in my office because their blood sugar levels are so high, and gotten into more fights than I could ever talk about with eating disorder clinicians when they're saying, but they have to learn how to eat a piece of cake. And I'm like, why? All to be said that some people who want to learn to eat a piece of cake, like via con Dios, good for you. Want to hear a really interesting story?
always.
I was accepted to do a presentation this year at International Eating Disorders Association, which, as you and I both know, is absolutely crazy because the title of my presentation was Harm Reduction Food Addiction for the Treatment of Binge Eating Disorder. Can you believe it? It was like Brown versus the Board of Education. It's like, we couldn't believe that I got in because I'd never have anything about food addiction at eating disorders. And then the head of the International Eating Disorders called me and said, hey, we're getting a lot of complaints from the Health at Any Size movement about your presentation. So we want to give you an offer to change the presentation to better serve that population. And I said, wait, didn't this go through a blind study? They're like, yeah, we really loved it. We want to offer that to you. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm not coming there thinking I'm making friends. No worries. And I said, I'm coming to be Brene Brown Brave because to me, there are outliers of intuitive eating. And I thought maybe a clinician or two could learn a different way. So maybe they could help somebody. And this is really scary that the world is becoming so polarized and we're in such a trauma response that we can't even soften to look at research, that we can't even soften in this anti-diet movement. So can we talk a little bit about structured eating and the difference between structured eating and a diet? And like, talk me through if I came to you with like a big binge eating disorder. I came to you and said, I can't stop eating. I don't know what to do. Like, what would you know? How would you know to help me? What do you think?
I always like to, have like my first appointment is always really long because I like to hear the whole story.
Yeah, you're good like that.
I will. So let's say that somebody is binge eating a lot of sweet stuff, or they're really struggling with cravings for sweet foods during their day, and maybe like afternoon is their tricky time. I might say, okay, so it's our first session. We're not going to solve all the problems today, but let's start with one change we can make.
Mm-hmm.
And, so for example, and I see a lot of people who crave sugar for so many different reasons, but I often will say, okay, so here's, and I put on my nerd hat and we talk about how blood sugar management works.
Yeah.
Because that is so important for not just like our energy and our weight and our, organ system function, but our mood, our cognitive function,
our gut health.
Yep. And so I'll be like, okay, so I would say if you really want something sweet in the afternoon, I noticed that you're not really letting yourself have, a balanced intentional snack. You're having lunch at 12 and dinner's at 8. So it's totally normal that you're going to be hungry and
Oh my
needing,
God. If I didn't eat for 8 hours,
gosh, I'd be a mess.
watch out world. Here I come,
Yeah. The worst for me would be driving while hungry.
I
Like that.
want to also discuss I follow Jess on Instagram pretty seriously because I just think you cook so nicely. And I'm just learning how to do that in the pandemic. It's just like you're always like, well, then I had a little leftover this. It seems so normal. I said a little leftover this, and then I added a little this to it. And then I had some of this over here. And it just looks so delightful. I'd happily come over post-COVID and take all of your leftovers.
Right. We can finally do that. And, that's the thing. For me, for somebody to be successful, they need to be able to feel like they're able to simplify, and that whatever steps they're taking fits into their life, not them trying to fit their life around a routine. And I think for me, that's the difference between a diet. I feel like when we can talk about some loose structure,
Yeah.
like, hey, have a protein with your sweet thing in the afternoon. And like that to me is like loose structure. So if you want chocolate, have some chocolate chips in a yogurt, or have some nuts in a piece of chocolate. Like that's how we'll start making that work.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we'll talk, gradually we would change that a little bit, but, and that's just one example, it
Yeah.
could be so many versions, but
I love when Dr. Mark Hyman says that sugar could be considered like a recreational drug. That always hit me so nicely because like then there are some people who can't drink alcohol safely, and then there are some who can drink alcohol safely, and then we're saying, oh, but maybe never, maybe it's not so good for you.
Well, you see those studies, with comparing, and I'm sure you've read this, and maybe we even talked about this, studies comparing sugar to cocaine.
Yeah.
And just like the mice are like all over the Oreos and the sugar,
So if we had a triangle of a podcast right now, and there was a rigid intuitive eating nutritionist sitting on the pod with us right now, like what would they say right now?
Oh, they would probably tell us that no, like, well, this is my idea of what they would tell us.
Yeah, just our idea. It's okay.
I can imagine being told that, that no, like you have to learn how to be moderate with sugar. And
That's right.
like you, I've started, I accept it when my patients tell me like I can't keep that in the house. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, then don't keep it in the house. Let's do something else.
I think sometimes, and this is just been my experience, keeping it in, it's not that I couldn't keep it in the house. It's like the energy it would take for me to keep it in the house. I can keep a lot in the house, but I'm years and years and years into this. But in the beginning, keeping it in the house was just took so much energy out of me. It was like, why would I have to sit here in deep obsession when, and my experience is that like, and then you eat too much of it, and then we process that. And that for some people, just not doing it might be better. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, the boring answer, it really does depend on the person.
Yeah.
I've seen people where we trial that. We're like, okay, well, what if you like, what if you keep it in the house and just see how you do? And then like a week later, they're like, I can't handle this. And I just kept thinking about it all the time. Like then we'll step back. But then I've also seen times where I'll suggest to someone, okay, you said you can't be moderate with this thing. Like, how would it feel to not have it at home? Or if you had to go out special and get it? And they're like, but then that feels like being too restrictive. And I don't like that either.
But I actually think, I don't think that's a boring answer at all. I actually think that's a deep and rich answer. It depends. Like, I think the whole point is biodiversity. And I am like a relationship person, right? Like I believe we're like have two relationships that we have to be in this world, right? And one's with food and one's with ourselves. And listen, you had such a cute wedding. I wish your husband could come on right now. He's so cute with his beard. Maybe we should invite him in.
Oh, the cat his beard at night.
And the cat. There's like a lot going on here. Like, see, I'm like very Instagram minded. This is how you maintain friendships in this pandemic. I'm like, how's the cat? How's the beard? But gosh, what was I just saying?
I know we're talking about weddings and cats.
Oh, right. Wait, what was I about to say? I totally just lost my train of thought. Wait, I need to like pause for a second. Intuitive eating. Oh, I can't even remember. Anyway, well, I guess we're gonna have to edit all this out, huh?
Yeah, well, I can tell you the wedding cake was delicious. We did eat it.
You did?
Wedding cake usually is terrible, but it was a friend of ours who is a Michelin starred like baker, like was like offered to make us this gorgeous cake, and um it
That's
was
so funny. I just want to pause the pod for like 1 second.
do it.
So like there's you, there's your husband. Like, wouldn't you say that your relationship with your husband is not the same as it was on your first date?
Oh my gosh, totally. Like I
Okay.
was like, there
Right.
was a big wall up.
Right. So like maybe you needed a little bit of like structure in that relationship, and like now it's looser. Like, wouldn't we be able to say the same? This is what I think about my big issue with all of this, um, with all of this trauma and all of this rage, is that we might be missing the next best thing for us. And we're certainly missing being able to know ourselves, which I actually think like, so it's, to me, it's just like an ever evolving relationship with food. I love what you're saying, which is, yeah, when I first meet someone, sometimes I'm like, hey, keep the dark chocolate in. That's a great idea. Or take like, if we keep into these rigid ideas of like, well, only intuitive eating works for me, it's like, that's what we're saying. Like, that's the same prison that we're being kept in when we're in eating disorder or when we're in diet drama.
Well, I don't know if you've seen this in your work, but for those patients who they see a lot about intuitive eating on the internet, and they're like, oh, I want to do that, or but then they feel like they're struggling with it, and they feel like they're failing because they want structure. Because I see that sometimes,
I
and I'm
do.
like,
Well, I only treat people who like intermittent eating sorry, intuitive eating dropout. Like people come to me pretty raw, pretty raw. And they, truth be told, and I bully me if you must, but like I deal with people who are like, please help me, give me some structure. I need a lot of structure. I need a lot of guidance. I can't see anymore, And then in years' time, I believe in a concept called humble eating, not intuitive eating, because I think humble eating sort of says, well, there's things that really don't work in my system, and I'm never going to challenge myself to eat them. But
yeah, see, I love that. That seems like such a self-compassionate approach.
well, I'm a therapist.
Yeah, and like that's what I struggle with, like, because I don't know, the patients I work with have been through so much hardship, and I don't want to like sometimes there's other things that we should be focusing on,
Yeah.
like, so maybe you feel too overwhelmed to eat a donut because you're dealing with all this other stuff in your life. Like, let's talk about that stuff first, and we'll come back to the donut like eventually.
Oh, I love that, Jess. I love that. And like the podcast is called What You're Craving. And I was thinking about our conversation, and I was like, not being able to tell my truth and feeling boxed in to not be able to tell my truth is like what you're eating. Like that's just, to me, that's just, and I think we spark such confusion in this. When we get so rigid, we spark confusion in people, right? There's only one way. My big one is like, if somebody tells you that there's only one way, run away.
I love that so much. Well, that happens a lot. Like I get a lot of people like, I went to this nutritionist and she told me to follow this diet and it was miserable. I'm like,
You're like, good key that doesn't work.
yeah. And but then they think it's them, that they're the problem.
Yeah, but
And
say that 3 times. Can you tell us more? Tell me more about that. Because that's where the diet drama and trauma comes from, right?
well, I think it's so complex, but I from my, in my experience, what I've seen a lot of is, we're not conditioned to be confident around our choices. And I think what I see is, and I work a
Wow.
lot with women, and it's a lot of like their whole life, they're used to questioning and to kind of not trust themselves around, like, there's because there's all this like diet culture drama that, yeah, we're fed from like day one.
Day
And
one.
there's also the generational trauma around food. I
Yeah.
think that comes up a lot in my work.
Generation trauma, you mean how your mom was with food and how your grandma was with food. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
sometimes we don't realize, it takes like someone else to be like, well, tell me more about your grandmother and what
Yeah.
that was like. And
Yeah. The inherited eating disorder for sure.
that's a very real thing. And but I think sometimes like people, get so overwhelmed that they want there to be one solution, and they want the fix. And I think we're not as conditioned to be suspicious of people who are like, I can fix you, and
Yeah, that really, I just had a light bulb. Yeah. So in such a desperation for there to only be one solution, people get it. And then when it doesn't work for them, instead of saying, maybe I should try something else, or wow, this one didn't work, they're like, wow, I've really screwed up.
yeah, and
It's me.
I like to ask them, why they feel they weren't successful, or what about that diet they were on felt hard.
Hmm.
I mean, I also will ask, what did you like about that plan, or what did you like about that approach?
Mm.
But, because I'm digging
Those
for.
are great questions, though. I mean, but because I think uh, to me, the actually most interesting piece of research in all of weight loss, and I hate that word more than life itself, but it happens to be where it comes from. So let me cite it where it lives, is that the only thing that really ever counts in it is self-determination, right? So it's determining for yourself. So this is why I'm so scared, because we know that the only thing that works is self-determination. And yet we're so polarized right now that you're bad if you're not doing intuitive eating. And I'll tell you something, in the extreme food addiction world, you're bad if you're intuitive eating. Let me make that really clear. I mean, I am a harm reductionist food addiction person, and I believe wholeheartedly, one size doesn't fit all. And I think even in food addiction, it's like you find your own way, you find your own way, which I think is really troublesome because of diet culture, right? Because diet culture tells you, oh, you failed at my 30-day plan. You're awful.
Right? It's like,
Like, what are we supposed to do?
oh, it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Or
Well,
like people
in
always want to.
multi-billion dollar industry,
Well,
get me a supplement.
oh my gosh, the supplement
What do
question.
you think of supplements?
Again, like I mean, I remember one of the most valuable things I was ever taught in nutrition school was like the only thing a vitamin can cure is a deficiency in that vitamin.
Damn.
And
Say it again.
and I think that people supplement marketing. My inbox is all day, every
Oh,
day,
I
like
bet.
supplement companies.
You could start a side hustle.
Seriously, like it is wild and unregulated.
Yeah,
But I
I
think
forgot that part.
supplements, they have their place, like I think with certain ailments, you need different things.
Absolutely.
And I'm not somebody that believes everyone has to be on a multivitamin, but I think that when there are gaps in the diet, or if somebody has a condition that, impacts their nutrient needs, I
Hmm.
think that supplements can be very useful. But I think sometimes they're overly marketed and overly prescribed. And I've done projects here and there, marketing, like consulting projects with supplements. I very strongly believed in, but
Yeah.
in doing those projects, I've always tried to be very clear, like, this is not like for every single person. This is like, a particular reason I use this thing, or that I use this to recommend to my clients. But I am so picky about who I will work with, especially with supplements, because it is just like, it's nuts. It's nuts. And it's like
It's
shiny object syndrome.
Well, yeah, so right. I mean, I wonder, right, as you're talking, like, and gosh, I mean, the amount of people, and I really hear what you're saying. I think there are so many people who will say to me, like, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
I think, you know, there are some really straight evidence-based things when you're really suffering with binge eating disorder and food addiction, but eventually you got to get off the nipple, because you got to create your relationship with food. And that idea of doing it imperfectly is so hard for people, and we call it the abstinence violation effect. It's like one people make one mistake. Diet culture has gotten it that we make one mistake and it's like we get a flat tire and we go slash all the tires. That our reaction to making a mistake is not to get curious, it's to burn up a car.
And that analogy describes it so perfectly. It is just, oh my gosh, it's just like, why is like imperfection? Why is that considered a bad thing? Like, why can't it just be like, this is how you're doing it? Why does it have to be like you did it wrong?
I know, but if you think about, I mean, what I'm so impressed by is I mean, listen, I think there are times where I shade myself a little bit on social too, where I won't say that I think sugar is addictive because I don't want to say somebody not to hear my message. And maybe that, it's like, I think there's a part of it where if all of these practitioners who are here to heal are either scared to do their message or not willing to hear another message, then we're contributing to the problem. Right? So how is anybody to heal if the healers are scared or the healers are too rigid? I mean, how is anyone to heal?
No, it's terrifying. And it's and with social media being so pervasive and one of the primary places where people are getting their health information,
Yeah.
it's I had like some of my colleagues, I was in a professional Facebook group, and a colleague started a thread about like liability insurance for bloggers.
Oh.
And like, I was like, wow, yes, we need to be talking about this. This is a huge thing.
Tell me more.
But like, I think that, with people going to social media for their health information, like, I feel like as clinicians, we do have a responsibility to be like, as we would in a patient session, to be sharing, like the facts and here's what's in the evidence. But what happens is, the algorithms kind of get, people overly focused on, getting, enough clicks, enough likes, enough engagement. And I think that also can impact how people are communicating and what they're sharing. And
Yeah.
that's really scary to me.
But I also think we've lost, I mean, pardon the pun, but it's like we've lost our gut. Like I really relate. Like when I was really struggling, like I would go to all these doctors and they'd tell me to do something and I'd sort of try it. But I think if I had been able to sort of tap in, which I think is really hard when you're actively addicted to something because your wisdom sort of being held hostage by addiction. But I think if I would have tapped in, I would have said, you know what, this isn't working for me. And it's like, we're not allowed to say that, so someone will say to me, do you think this is a good protein bar for me? And I'll say, I don't know. Why don't you go eat the protein bar and see if it's a good protein bar for you? Because people are so aversive to making any mistake. And I think also wanting to put it on me, like on my relationship with food. I know what works for me with my relationship with food.
Yeah, well, that's what's so interesting. I'm sure you get this question quite a bit. It's like, what do you eat or what do you do? And I'm like, well, who cares? Like, what?
Also, but like, I always want to know it. I mean, inside, I always want to know what you're eating. So you actually are like, it's very thoughtful.
Yeah, but it's, I also realize as a nutrition professional, like I'm putting it out there.
It's part of your brand.
I'm inviting the conversation.
It's part of your brand. But I know what you mean. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, but it is interesting because there's this comparison that goes on too. And we do look at what other people are doing. And it's, it's like, oh, should I be doing that? Will I have more followers if I do that? Like,
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it, both through the lens of like, if it's like a patient or, a person who's looking at like wellness influencers who like, it drives me freaking nuts. Like when I see people like I always am very calm about how I respond, but a patient will be like, I follow this influencer. Do you know her? And like, she does, it's so, like, my fire breathing dragon wants to like.
Me too. But it's only because I think it's like those of us who have been in the bottom, right? I mean, only because I literally I've almost died of this thing. And I've watched other people try to do some of these suggestions and it hasn't been the right match for them and almost died doing them. And it's like, actually, I remember when I mean, it's still a big thing, like the celery juice. And I was like, so excited. I was like, yeah, and I got a juicer and I did the whole thing. Cause I was so into the health benefits of it, honestly. But a little cup of celery juice has 11 grams of sugar. And I am personally like, I'm a biological sugar addict. Like I'm an alcoholic. Those are all the kind of the same thing. And I would drink the celery juice and I just want to go to sleep. And I tried it a bunch of times because, I'm loyal like that. But I was like, hey, this is really good benefits, but it doesn't work for me. I wasn't like shunning celery juice, nor was I like just going to drink it because it had good health benefits. But again, that was pretty far down the line. I think that that's the whole point, right? To thine own self be true. And it's really hard to thine own self be true and to soften and be examining and curious when there's just all of this rage going on and all of this, like, what would you call it? Like
Well, you mentioned trauma activation earlier. I don't know if that was the phrase that you used, but I remember like watching what was unfolding and being like, wow, this feels a lot like PTSD to me. Why do I
Yeah.
feel like I need to go crawl in a hole right now? And I think that happens sometimes and with events, where people get very emotional and
Yeah.
everyone else's stuff is coming from like all their backstory that they're not necessarily always sharing. And it's just
Well,
kind
and
of,
then the herd comes in, by the way, right? Because if you're reading these things and everybody starts jumping in, and then it's just like this gang mentality happens. And I, 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 I think I love what you say. Like there's not a whole lot of conclusive research on anything because of biodiversity, because we're all a bunch of snowflakes. And I think also ever evolving. We're humans.
oh my gosh, like I have to have that conversation so often with my patients. It's like, hey, like what worked for you in your 20s is going to be different from what works for you in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, and that's normal and okay. And let's
Yeah.
embrace that. And I want you to feel great like where you are now, not comparing yourself to
And
where
might
you.
I add, for me, like when me and the like who I was like emotionally and spiritually, like I really needed a lot of hand holding when I first went into recovery from my eating disorder. But if you tried to hold my hand now and told me what to eat, I'd be like, I'll meet your fire, Sagittarius. Don't you tell me what to eat, But like in the beginning, it's like they're just, I wish there could be more of a wisdom, you know? Hey, speaking of wisdom, can we just talk quickly about this delicious little book you wrote last year? Last year? You
Yeah, it came
sent
out
it to me. It's
2020.
so perfect. Can you just tell us about it? Because when we want to talk about what you're craving, this book is so helpful with getting to the bottom of it, or at least putting a pin in it while you're getting to the bottom of it. Can you like hype it a minute?
Yeah, sure. So my first book, baby, which came out in 2020, that's the Little
Awesome.
Book of Game Changers. So
Mm.
50 healthy habits for managing stress and anxiety.
And don't knock it till you tried it. Cause like it's delicious. Give us like your top three.
So, it's broken down into mind, body, and spirit sections. And my favorites change like every week.
Oh,
But
really? Because you're an evolving human. Wouldn't you know it?
but I will say, like one of the ones that's been working really well for me lately, and that's been working really well for my patients, is to put your own damn name on your calendar.
Get it.
Because it's like it's so easy to give our time to other people, but when you put your stuff on your calendar, I literally my calendar pops up and it says Jess. It's looking at me right now. And
Oh, am I in your self-care time?
well, I set aside time for the things that I want to block out time for, and I just have it like that. It also prevents. So I have an electronic calendar that people can book like recordings with me or other meetings. And what was happening is if I didn't block off that time, other people would like grab it, and I was
Mm.
like, oh crap! Now I'm like double booked after work on a Tuesday. That's how did I let this happen?
I'm like very proud of myself. I book out 30 minutes during my day for meditation. So I do that. I'm like, check mark, good job, gold stars, Molly.
Yeah.
What else?
So I also, in the book, I actually do talk about the basics of, and this is just in part of the basics of blood sugar management. A tool that I use a lot is the overthink proof plate.
Wow.
And I use it as a loose structure to offer because it's like it's flexible based on what you're in the mood for, what you have on hand, but it's pretty basic. It's literally filling half your plate with non-starchy vegetables, quarter your plate with some kind of protein, plant or animal, a eighth of your plate with some kind of healthy fat, and an eighth of your plate with some kind of carbohydrate.
Mm.
And that's just a tool that I offer because I was like, everyone was saying, I'm just overthinking all this stuff. Like, what do I eat? And I'm like, okay,
Right.
here, start with
It's a
this.
great way to think about it. Right, right, right. What
Mm.
about one for spirit?
Yeah, that was probably my favorite part to write.
I mean, that's why you and I are friends.
Yeah, like that. Well,
Can
like,
you
well,
give us two just for fun?
yeah. So the spirit section, there's a chapter in there about ritual.
Oh.
like having some kind of cleansing ritual. And for me, like I grew up, my mom she's a hypnotherapist and a psychotherapist. Like I grew up.
Oh, come on the pod again. That's the whole thing. I want to hear that whole story.
Oh my gosh, there we could dig way
That's a
into
good one.
growing up with that.
Okay. So the hypnotherapist mom. Wow, Jess, you were full of surprises.
Well, she would when she first so she started as a hypnotherapist. She got certified when I was 10 and start or 10 or 11. And she, after doing that for a long time, she decided to further her education and become a psychotherapist. And but she still does lots of hypnosis. And but when she first started, she was seeing patients in our house, and she would always be like burning incense, and I just got very used to that. Like Nag Champa reminds me of my childhood.
Oh,
And like, so I have a chapter about uh have like one of the rituals that I use to help myself cleanse energy is to light incense and like different types. And
yeah.
so that's, and it doesn't have to be that, but any kind of thing that you can do in your day or when you need to kind of like hit the reset button, just energetically reminds you like, okay, like line in the sand, moving on.
Yeah. I think it's so, I do it religiously. When we were in our office space, we used a Palo Santo, which is like an incense. And, somebody had said to me, this space is one of your employees, you know, like, and you need to start to treat it that way. And I do believe, like, I love what you're saying, like, stop, like, okay, I'm going to leave my office and my clients and then I'm going to go home and be a different person. And when you bring it with you, for me, it's like, if I bring all of my problems in my workday into my house, like my hands in the cheddar popcorn before I know it. That's a beautiful one. I love ritual. Give us one more.
Okay. I'm also a big fan of oracle cards.
Yes, you really are. On
Yeah.
her Instagram.
My mother gave me my first deck of tarot cards as a confirmation gift when I was 14. She was like, okay, you've done the Catholicism thing.
Can I have your mom on the pod?
You should. She is a delight to talk to you about this stuff. But she wanted us to have that frame of reference to at least like know what it was about, and then we could kind of make our own decisions. But she was like, hey, like you need these, and gave me a deck of, it was goddess tarot cards.
Yeah.
And it just always made sense to me. I don't necessarily use the cards as future telling, but I think it's a really good way to get just like the randomness of it appeals to me, because it's not what the card says, it's how you react to the card that tells you what you know.
Yeah. I always think, like, beliefs are chosen, repeat something enough, it's a belief. And like, that's just always my gig on spirituality in a big way, which is like, what's the downside?
Right?
What's the downside of believing like, oh, someone's with me today, or, oh, I need to be careful? Like, what's the downside?
Yeah, I almost like, I don't need to know why that it works or how or like if it's real. I just need, but if it makes you feel good and adds value and meaning, like how is that bad?
If it helps your spirit, who cares?
Exactly.
If it helps your spirit, who cares?
Yeah, so in the book, that chapter, I share one of the ways that I use cards now is just to one of my favorite ways to do it is just to draw a card every morning and ask it a question and just kind of get some food for thought. I even have decks at my office at the hospital, because if I don't have time to do it before I leave the house, I still want to do it.
I have one behind me. Let's see.
So
Yeah, it's a good way. Listen, if it works for you, it works for you. I always think, again, like, don't knock it till you tried it, right? That's like, I wish I could say that to all of Instagram. Like, don't knock it till you try it. And if you don't like it, it's not for you. If you could leave us with like one nugget, that's a hard question. So if you don't have to answer, if you don't want, but like, if you could leave us with one nugget from this whole experience of wanting to censor yourself or wanting to be careful or people believing that there's only one way, what would you want to tell the person listening right now as a nutritionist?
Wow. I'm not really sure why this is what's coming to mind, because it's very similar to what I say about how to respond to food cravings. But like when you catch yourself responding really strongly to something, that's a really good invitation to explore why you're responding so strongly.
Yeah.
And to not be afraid to, to do that work and to really dig in and understand before you react, before you decide.
Right. Exactly. Jessica, you are a healer to my nutritionist drama. I'm so grateful to know you. If
Right.
people want to know more about you and they want to know more about what you eat like I do and what tarot cards you draw in the morning like I do, where are all the places we can find you?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at Jess Cording, but I can also be found on Twitter, Jess Cording, Facebook, Jessica Cording Nutrition. Of course, I'm on my website, jessicacordingnutrition.com, or the Drama Free Healthy Living podcast
Oh
on
yeah.
all the
That's a good one.
places.
You can listen to us talk on that. That was a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Friend, thank you so much for coming on today. Probably going to have you on again as my little nutrition friend expert. And I think we were Brene Brown brave, don't you?
Oh, yeah, I'm sweating.
Love you. Love you. Mwah.
Yeah, love you. Thank you for having me.